Are you going to be a welcome from here?
Yeah. Oh, God. Oh, absolutely.
Hello. So welcome everybody, Kaya. Welcome and thank you for joining us here, and thank you for joining us on live stream. Welcome. My name is Professor Dan McAullay. I'm ECU's Dean of Kurongkurl Katitjin and will be facilitating this morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second event in ECU's NAIDOC speaker series. Before we begin, a few housekeeping matters. The nearest bathroom facilities are located outside these doors, and there's some to the right. I think there might be some to the left. If you haven't already done so, please switch your phones to silent or turn them off. In an unlikely event of emergency, please follow the instructions of the event staff, who will take you to the nearest muster point. As this event is being live streamed and recorded, if you do not wish your image or voice on screen, please notify our event staff. There will be a Q&A session towards the end of the event where you, our in-person and online audiences, will have an opportunity to ask some questions of our amazing speakers. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that today's event may contain the names of people who have passed away. We're delighted to welcome Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, industry colleagues, community members, and ECU alumni, students and staff to this event. As we begin, I would like everyone to please welcome ECU's Elder-in-Residence, Nanaroma Winmar, who I take great pleasure inviting to sit down there and deliver her welcome to country. Nan.
Kaya ngarlak jurbin nunuk jinangin. Kaya ngarlak dunch you aku. Dujurak nunuk ngarlak warangka. Nunga buja ngarlak iriak. Kaya, like he said, I'm the elder in residence here. The old girl, you know. Yes. And it's a pleasure to be here to share this time with everybody and welcome you to this space, you know. And just to look around and see the different generations. Because I'm the Biddy, I'm the oldest generation anyway, you know. But just looking back and seeing ex-students and makes you realise how far you know, time's gone, and it makes me, I'm just delighted to know that what I'm looking at around me is our future, you know. Are you there, boy? Yes. You know, and I can say, you know, our future's in good hands, and that makes me feel when I'm ready to go, I'll be okay. And I just want to sing you into this space in a minute because we are one. We come together as one. We journey together as one. And hopefully everybody puts in their best towards sharing with other people. So I won't carry on, Dan, like I usually do. And I'd just like to sing you into this space. Gningala Yarran-Mark. Oh, hang on. I'll sing it in Noongar and I want you to sing it in English. Thank you very much. Sing that we're all here together. Gningala Yarran-Mark, Gningala Bulamord, Gningala Bula Butcherak you aku, Yang in Gningala Kundam, Dunch Warankin. Ngang nunuk ngarlak mudich mort. Everyone together, please. We are one. Do you know it? We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. Sorry, we share our dreams and sing with one voice. I am, you are. We are Australian. I like saying we're family of man because different ones come from different places, you know. Thank you very much and welcome to this space that we're sharing today. All right, Gay?
Thank you, Nan. Wonderful as always. ECU acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and their connection to the land we're meeting on today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise traditional owners of the lands where our online guests are joining from, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people, their cultures and their connection to the land which was never ceded. This year marks a significant milestone, 50 years of NAIDOC. a national celebration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and achievements. It's also a proud moment for ECU as we celebrate 20 years of the Kurongkurl Katitjin building here at ECU Mount Lawley. Kurongkurl Katitjin is ECU's Centre for Indigenous Australian Education and Research, and we're in the process of preparing for our move to the city campus in 2026. This is the second event in ECU's NAIDOC series. The series aims to foster respect, truth-telling and self-determination by embracing this year's NAIDOC theme, the next generation, strength, vision and legacy. It is also guided by ECU's newly released cultural narrative framework. At the heart of the cultural narrative framework are the life layer narratives, a gift from Whadjuk Noongar elders, each representing a unique aspect of Noongar knowledge, systems and worldviews. So they are Jinda, stars, Mortbudja, ecosystem, Kata, hills, Kep, water and Nada, subterranean. In recognition of this year's NAIDOC theme, ECU's NAIDOC speaker series will be guided by these 5 life layers. At the first event in this series, we explored Nada, the subterranean life layer, with cultural leaders Dr. Richard Wally, OAM, and ECU's Chloe Bullen, OAM. Today we turn to Kep, the water life layer. We'll explore what Kep represents and how it manifests in practice, offering deeper insight into the foundational cultural values that shape our shared journey. Today's discussion will offer valuable insight into how ECU's new cultural narrative can guide best practice. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions, hear directly from contemporary Aboriginal leaders, and walk away empowered to share this knowledge. MC, move to panel 6. Yes, it is on. So now to open this event, I'm honoured to introduce a remarkable mother and daughter duo whose experienced leadership, achievements and cultural knowledge embody the spirit of this year's NAIDOC theme. And Nan Roma, who's sitting with us. Remarkable grandmother, Nan. Great-grandmother. Gningala Yarran-Mark. Gningala is a trailblazer in every sense of the word. She is a qualified lawyer with a Master of Business Leadership and a Bachelor of Science in Indigenous Australian Research Methodologies. She was the first Aboriginal law graduate in WA to serve as an associate to Justice French and later as the first Aboriginal state prosecutor at the Director of Public Prosecutions. Gningala was a trainer for the WA Police Force and has held senior roles in Aboriginal employment, procurement and reconciliation plans development. Her board director experience is extensive, having served on boards including ECU's Council, Derbyl-Yerrigan Health Service, the Australian Wildlife Conservancy and the Water Corporation. She was a recipient of the Aurora Scholarship, travelling to Oxford, Cambridge, the London School of Business and the London School of Economics. Currently, Gningala is studying a PhD with us at ECU, researching procurement and the really important and timely issue of blackcladding. Thierra Clanton is a proud Noongar, Wangatha, Yamaji and Gidja Yoga. She is the Principal of Approvals Planning at Fortescue with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Management and Sustainability. Her journey into the Resources Centre began in 2006 when her family relocated to South Hedland during the explosion of the mining activity in the Pilbara. Starting as an administrative officer through a traineeship with BHP, Thierra has since worked with Woodside, Chevron, the Water Corporation and AIM, specialising in heritage and community engagement. She has also served on board roles including Derbyl-Yerrigan Health Service. In 2024, Thierra was the recipient of the AICD First Nations Director Scholarship for the Foundations of Company Director course. Both Gningala and Thierra have showed the ability to be adaptable and dexterous in their careers and family life, intergenerationally handing over or flow of skills and values to thrive and succeed, guiding but allowing free form flow like water. The Kep layer is one of responsiveness and dexterity, being alive to new opportunities, partnerships and collaboration, and as well as new ways of thinking and doing. From an internal perspective, this might involve instigating change to established frameworks and protocols, combined with education pieces and other things around these things that are changing. And its responsive engagement to sector and the place that is really important to why the cultural narrative layers have been developed for ECU, particularly with the move to the ECU City campus. And it's a great piece that's going to be guiding how we respond to all of our campuses across ECU. So I'm going to go straight into questions because I think we can do lots of questions. But I'm going to start with Gningala because I think this is an interesting one. This is from a friend of mine who actually you will know who works in Indigenous businesses. We hear a lot about the terminology of black cladding and particularly black washing. Could you explain what they are to the audience?
Okay, so black cladding is a colloquial term that defines where you've got a non-Indigenous partner that has undertaken the exercise to partner with an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander individual in the pretense of being business partners. But what actually sits behind that is that if one were to investigate the organisational structure of that business and the commercial entity that they're representing, you'll find that the so-called Aboriginal director actually doesn't have a seat at the table. There is no power. There is a power imbalance. And that Aboriginal director actually, when they're supposed to have 51% ownership, when you follow the money trail, you will find that they actually are not getting 51% of the profit margin. So it's misleading and deceptive conduct that leads to an unjust enrichment. Blackwashing, on the other hand, is something similar to greenwashing, where you've got industry players who purchase carbon credits, in order to assume some sort of social license to operate, when in actual fact, it's all smoke and mirrors. Some actually do well in the green space in terms of ensuring that we are addressing the issue of climate change, but it's not nearly enough. So when we're talking about black cladding, we're talking about dishonesty, we're talking about exploitative behaviours. Why do I mean by that? Well, you think about the financial exploitation that comes out of securing contracts that are specifically set aside for the purpose of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business. A report that came out from Melbourne University talked about $70 billion revenue generated by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses. But it would be fair to say that given the increase of black-cladded companies on the landscape, that would be a minuscule amount where authentic Aboriginal businesses are getting a cut of that. Does that?
Certainly does. Okay. Thank you. I have a follow-up question before I move to Thierra. But so the federal Indigenous procurement policy was recently reviewed and changed to read that an Aboriginal company's 51% ownership to reduce the possibility for black cladding to occur. Do you think this will work? But what's really needed to prevent this from happening?
Okay, so fundamentally flawed is the policy itself. If you were to look at, let's talk about the WA piece of legislation. There was an expectation that all stakeholders be at the negotiating table when we're drafting policy. The policy was described as the West Australian Aboriginal Procurement Policy. Do you think there were any little dark-skinned folks sitting at the table? I bet there was none. And in actual fact, it's been proven by some academics that not one Aboriginal business proprietor was actually sitting at the negotiation table. So when you have policies that once again are designed about us, without us, you've got a fundamentally flawed framework that doesn't hear us, that we become invisible. Oh, but get a load of this. They did invite us later to a negotiation of how they will roll out the policy framework so people understand how to execute. Too late. The horse is bolted. So when you've got this kind of approach where we're just an afterthought, and the fact that it is only a policy, therefore it has no legitimacy on its own, so therefore it's unenforceable, so therefore these little buggers that get into black cladding will get away with murder, and there is no one who is being held to account.
So thinking about the theme KEP and responsiveness and agility, how are Aboriginal businesses supposed to navigate that space, thinking about how can they be more agile and responsive to the policy framework that we're dealing with?
Well, they are. There is a peak body that's now established on the East Coast where all of the Aboriginal chambers from all around Australia have got together, formulated a corporate entity, and they will set the agenda, and they should be the people that government agencies should be leaning into, not the goddamn supply nations of the world who do nothing but have a glorified database that charges tens of thousands of dollars for blue chip companies to get access to their grubby little database. Forget about that. At the end of the day, supply nation does not have any regulatory authority. The Aboriginal Indigenous peak body for Aboriginal chambers of commerce around Australia should be the agency. They have established themselves, and guess what? Fundamental to their existence is the fact that if you are to call yourself an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander business, you've got to prove your indigeneity in the first instance. You can't go buy it from the store at the Coles Market right down the road here. Honey, that ain't going to work. Because guess what? They will check you. There will be procedural requirements to establish in order to affirm your indigeneity. Because if you can't prove your indigeneity, you don't get a chance to secure the contracts that are for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business. We're not talking about someone who went to bed on Monday who was a white person and then woke up on Wednesday wearing a ball cap that's got the little Aboriginal flag and says, I'm an Indigenous Australian. It doesn't work like that. And it should never be allowed to work like that. So in terms of agility, we have the capacity, we have the professionalism, we have the experience, but the tragedy is policymakers, and governments included, are very recalcitrant in the way that they approach the issue of where the voice should come from. It should be out of the Indigenous space.
So and working within policy frameworks can be quite difficult at times, but that shows like a good example of, you know, the principle kept with the chambers coming together. So, you know, being responsive, working out a better way of ethically engaging with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses, and particularly being collaborative in that effort.
Well, it is collaborative because there is an understanding at that level that we all come from various different languages, more than 250 languages Australia-wide, and there is this innate appreciation for the diversity, rather than branding us all as just some black fellas down the street. There is an understanding that out of each domain, out of each cultural group, there will be different parameters that are the levers for those communities in terms of what their priorities are. And so Aboriginal people are incredibly adept at doing that. I mean, we've survived for the last 237 years of putting up with colonial constructs. We have the capacity to break out of those very harmful frameworks that lock us into thinking that, you know, we're these wonderful little museum pieces, that our culture is frozen in time, and we should be pinned to a wall like a butterfly, and, you know, we just pull them out occasionally to look at those wonderful little Aborigine folks. No, it doesn't work like that. So in the world of business, we've got some incredibly smart Indigenous operators who are running multi-million-dollar organisations, but do you hear about that in the news media? No, because of the narrative from the coloniser is about a negative narrative. It's a narrative of we're so needy, we're so desperate, we can't do for ourselves. But we've been doing for ourselves quite nicely behind the scenes. We don't need your validation, we don't need your spotlight, and in some instances we don't even need your money, so thanks but no thanks. So we do have that kind of fluidity. We are evolving. Every century will change. I mean, I look at myself, and not that I compare myself with my daughter, but she's a different kettle of fish than I ever was. And there's some benefits in not listening to everything I say, even though I wanted her to.
Speaking of your daughter. So that's a really good example of a collective coming together and utilising or exhibiting KEP as a principle. So how do you, as an individual, use the KEP principles of agility and responsiveness, particularly in your current role?
I think with the collaborative approach, and when I look at water and the stability of water, there's always different alternative options and pathways. And in my current role in mining sector, it's utilising my voice, but also strategising what other options can we implement around utilising our voices and having input from Indigenous perspective. You're always going to come up against the hard front and the wall against having those voices being at the forefront. So it's how do you strategise and pick a right pathway in which you can actually add influence, and it's all about the relationships and the networking that you do establish in this space. So I'm very lucky that I'm very much my mother's daughter around. I love networking and talking till the days come home, but in terms of creating really strong change, it's about building those strong alignments and unity with all members of business and outside of business, and really putting down the foundation that if you don't have a really strong relationship, firstly with your traditional owners, and if I reiterate back to heritage, with the change of the heritage legislation when that came into play, it was such a challenging time for mining to navigate, well, how do we work with this? Because there was such a fear mentality that was done by the farmers about, we've got to pay all this money to TOs. Well, it's not that case. It's about really utilising the voices of First Nations, especially with the destruction of Juukan Gorge. What was the next stepping stone around how do we protect heritage? How do we make sure the voices of the traditional owners are heard? And it's not now just the tangible, but it's the intangible. And if we talk about water, it's such a strong pathway because everywhere there's water, there's life. So we need to be reminded and be humble in the fact that we are caretakers of this country. So if we are destroying country, make sure we restore it back to the place that it should be restored to, and with a right pathway and a respectable foundation that we can utilise.
That's great. Just on the being in mining at the time of contentious, it was pretty contentious. So how do you, in your role or previous roles, how have you adapted to changes in policies, technology, but more importantly, how have you responded to that the community expectations of say, an industry that you're working in?
Yeah. Look, whenever you work in mining, it's always contentious because, you know, you want to do right. And I think for myself in my previous roles working in heritage for 5 years, yes, it was challenging in the sense of we're here to destroy heritage, but how do we make sure we negotiate and communicate the best way forward? And I found there were pros and cons in that. Obviously, in mining, the end goal is to get iron ore out of the ground, right? And that's business BAU. But in terms of getting the iron ore out of the ground, how do we do it in a respectful pathway and process? So my role previously was really aligning around how do I build really strong relationships with the traditional owners, but also communicating with the morons up in senior management what's actually the importance of this place, and really reiterating to them, because all they see is just a site, they see money, but when you reiterate the messaging of something such as a songline, you can't destroy that. And so I think it created a strength for myself in that position to actually push back to the broader business. Were there times that I loggerheads with lots of people? Yes, I did, but I knew as an Indigenous person, it's not just my role working in mining, but it's also my continued legacy in working with community, that we have a cultural obligation and duty to make sure we're doing the right things by the traditional owners that we work with, because at the end of the day, it's not the mining's reputation on the line, it's my own. So I need to make sure I'm doing it the right way with the cultural protocol and process, but also making sure that the two pathways come together. So it's really navigating that space, and it can be challenging because community expectations is, well, you work your mining, you know what you're doing, give us everything. And it's like, well, this is not how it works. This is and it's almost you have to go back to, there's two ways. There's the Western way and then there's the cultural way. So there's two different ways in which you need to navigate that. And when you communicate it, it's how do you communicate that effectively so everyone understands it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you another question, and I'm
Yeah.
going to get Gningala to answer as well.
Yeah.
But we're moving on to the next aspect, which is ethical engagement and policy creation. So specifically for ECU, but I want to get your experiences from where you're both
Different
at.
sectors, yeah.
So how would you approach developing policies, for example, such as procurement or digital sovereignty? And how should we prioritise ethical engagement with community, Indigenous mob, and local communities that work with the university?
Yeah, I think really good question. Is that still on? Yeah. I think first thing you need to do your research, right? Because I can't stand when businesses or organisations come to the table and communicate with our community and they actually don't know what they're talking about. So do your research. So I'll talk about data sovereignty, working in heritage and planning and environmental space. Data sovereignty is so important for traditional owners across the world and for First Nations people. I mean, we're the most people that have had data or research done on us, that we are the powers of our own data and we hold the power of this data. So the minds are shifting with our community around, well, you might want to do research, but we actually hold this information. So when we talk about data sovereignty or data unity and a direction moving forward, you look at the United Nations Declaration that it's actually the rights of the traditional owners that hold their data. So if you don't know your first fundamental basis of it being a United Nations declaration, do your research. In addition to that, I think consultation is key, because when I talk about consultation, you need to have active consultation. I'm not talking about a sit down, have a chat, after an hour you're done. That's not the way at all. You need to have First Nations people at the start of the conversation when you're brainstorming these ideas, especially for ECU University. Brainstorm these ideas and talk about how can we transition this pathway moving forward. And I've seen places where it's worked really well with traditional owner groups and PBCs, where they have the inclusion of the traditional owners from the start to the finish. And then I've seen cases in mining where it doesn't work very well. So it's making sure that you have constant engagement, having the truth about the reason of data sovereignty and data unity, because us as First Nations people, we are sick of data coming out and just saying we're going to do a research, and it's happened time and time again where there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of trust because our voices, our input is then taken into a researcher's input in a researching paper, that you've actually taken our cultural knowledge and information. So why are we not on the paper? Why are we not included in that article? And I think that's what we have to reiterate, that if you are having conversations around data or information and inputting, making sure that they're added to the paper, they're added to the research, and they've got a seat at the table every step of the way.
Great. Gningala. Same question, different answer.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Just
So it's
briefly.
around approaching developing policies and thinking about, examples are procurement, digital sovereignty, but it's really around how do you prioritise ethical engagement with Indigenous communities, but also local communities that that an industry would be working with.
So I think the first port of call is the word respect. You've got to come in with a respectful attitude to the fact that you might not be the font of all knowledge, even though some people wander around this world thinking that they are. Grubby little humans they are. But if we're talking about agility and innovative teaching and research, you've got to start with exploring with an inquisitive mind. And what do I mean by that? It's not about the end result, which is, multiple letters after your name. It's about the relational journey with people that don't look like you, that have a different fundamental worldview, that have a cultural framework. And as Thierra's already reiterated earlier, we have a responsibility to our own communities. And when we go back to our own communities, we're going to be held to account. And if we haven't done things in accordance with what the cultural protocols dictate, we're in strife. And we never leave our jobs. Our job is a 24/7. And when we leave the workplace, we might go into the local shopping centre, but that's where the real work starts. Our mob catch us up, they ask us questions, they're consistently pinning us down to get some sort of response. And so when I say with exploring with an inquisitive mind, it's about, okay, so I understand what the research framework looks like, I know what responses I'm hoping to get, but be a little bit flexible in that space, rather than with an approach that says, well, I expect to get this particular outcome. Water flows for a reason, because if you try to bottle it up, it'll create so much pressure that it will bust out of those frameworks. So be mindful of what it is that you're expecting from people, particularly people who might not have a similar cultural origin or a language group or, you know, a lived experience similar to yours. And when I say inquisitive mind, it's also being free to think outside the box. We constantly get hamstrung, I think, in some respects when we're talking about research or policy frameworks, that it's got to sit in a nice little frame, that there's this little box and we've got to squeeze it in there somehow. Well, actually, that's the approach that causes all sorts of chaos, all sorts of trauma to people who are involved in the process, and you'll usually end up with a product that's not fit for purpose. And that's the next point I wanted to talk about. Ensuring that it is fit for purpose. But for whose purpose is the real question you need to be asking. And like I alluded to earlier about the Aboriginal procurement, the WA Aboriginal procurement plan, when they talked about key stakeholders, the fundamental issue was about the missing seat at the table of Indigenous Australians. And so when you do something silly like that, that's actually not ensuring that you've got a fit-for-purpose policy framework. And if it's a research outcome that you're looking for, and if you haven't included all of the stakeholders, you also have to understand that it is also a responsibility to, whatever those discussions are, whatever those conversations look like, to bring that back, because Indigenous Australians need to have ownership over every step in the process, as opposed to having research done on them or about them. This is a chance to flip the switch and talk about how we can be innovative, how we can be inclusive. I mean, I hear about diversity and inclusion, and I think to myself, oh God, here we go again. On some of the boards that I sit on, diversity and inclusion only talks about gender diversity, and the only people getting a Guernsey at the table are non-Indigenous women who think that they're so hard done by, but everybody else's inclusion is eliminated from the melting pot, and it's not really diversity, because we're not talking about diversity of language or ethnic origins or cultural background or any of those. So ensure that it's a fit for purpose. And one of the things that I have seen time and time again is that you get various different entities that want to do all things, and they've got this huge big wish list. That is actually going to get you in trouble. What really needs to happen is that we need to do a few things exceptionally well. Now, this institution prides itself on a reputation of getting exceptional outcomes for student learning. They do that really well. But if you were to turn the page and say, well, what are you doing about Aboriginal procurement? Crickets are cricking in the background, and there's no needle that's shifting at all. So we're stuck in some areas that I think are important as an organisation. If you're going to grow and mature, you need to be coming up with a lot more innovation in that space. The other thing that's vitally important is to create forums to generate ideas about what might be the new frontiers. Quite often we can get stuck into thinking that what we've done 2 years ago is going to work right here and now, and you'll usually find that it's the wrong fit, it's no longer fit for purpose, it's actually outlived its use-by date. So be prepared to put those old ways of thinking and those old methods on the shelf, park them. You may want to refer to them at some point later in time, but they've now passed their use-by date. Think about what might be the new frontier. And when you're thinking about what might be the new frontier, think about the people that were missing at the last table or the Last Supper that should actually be at the next dinner table.
And I think just adding to what Mum's just said is that we also need to broaden the horizon in terms of who we are engaging, because a lot of the times we do have certain individuals, especially in our own community, where we select the same individual. Well, we need to broaden that, because I'm seeing so much young Indigenous leaders in this space that work in different sectors, that why are we not adding them to the table? Because they're the new generation. They've got the young innovative ideas. They are aware of the times. They should be coming to the table as well. So the youth need to have a seat in the Guernsey as well.
Thank you for including me in the conversation.
Yeah, you too.
Moving on to collaboration and partnership. We've already spoken about it, and it's incredibly important. But how would you foster collaboration and reciprocal learning between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff in a large public or a private organisation?
I think I get really frustrated when everyone talks about reconciliation this and reconciliation that, or cultural awareness this, and I'm like, well, what is that? Like, what is that? There needs to be more spaces where we're having cross-cultural conversations. I think we need to be courageous in these conversations and open a dialogue or a platform where we can have those open forum conversations in a respectful space. I think businesses need to implement not just, I'm sick of just cultural awareness. What about cultural competency? What about cultural integrity? What about cultural understanding? And I raised this back at Murdoch University on a panel, and I said, well, you've got a bunch of environmental engineers, for God's sakes. Why don't you have a cultural implementation into that? Why don't they go out on country and hear from First Nations people that are doing great things in their own businesses and sustainability? You need to look at how can you change the narrative. And people are looking, similar to what Mum said, they're looking in a small-minded box, and that's going to cause havoc, because we're seeing what's being done with cultural awareness and the baseline stuff and reconciliation is, well, what are you actually achieving? Are you achieving any actual real goals, or are you just doing a tick box exercise to say we're doing our bit by working with the blackfellas? So we really need to look beyond that and look at how can create strong strategy and implementation moving forward, because how we've done things in the past, it's not getting very far. There's a new way of thinking, there's a new way of working, and we need to really work on that in all sectors. So it's not just in the mining sector, it's across everywhere, where you're still seeing a gap around inclusivity, where we're seeing a gap of Indigenous executives in these positions, we're seeing a gap of Indigenous leaders stepping up. So there's more that people can do, but it's up to them whether they choose not to or choose to do.
So in relation to the context of connectivity to Indigenous communities, I don't think we're going to get there if we're just going to have a token Aboriginal person sitting on the council like I was before. That's not enough. Okay, so I have a voice, and I'm very privileged that I get to occupy spaces unapologetically. But it shouldn't just be the one lone voice, because I am just one person with my own lived experience, with my own cultural language groups that I belong to, that I am responsible to. But I can't speak for every blackfella, and I hate it. I absolutely despise it when I go into a forum and they're talking Indigenous issues, and the first person they look at is me. That little blackfella there. And I'm supposed to know. And then they ask me, oh, do you know Mary Brown? Like I'm supposed to know every blackfella living in Western Australia? Doesn't work like that.
Hello, Mary Brown.
And picking up on what Thierra says, there needs to be increased visibility of Indigenous professionals. We don't need to just bring out the token black every now and again to say, oh, we've done our bit for Indigenous Reconciliation Week. I get tired of that. In fact, I actually blew my stack when I was on an open forum where, they were talking about the importance of welcome to country. And I stopped the discussion and I said, look, whilst I appreciate the Aboriginal experts here on the panel, I appreciate you, I respect you, and I value what you have to say. I said, once again, the popular media have got you hoodwinked into thinking that this shit is important. It isn't. And then I reminded Reconciliation Australia. I said, oh, Reconciliation Australia, you have your wonderful little yarning sessions and your little beef pies or your emu pies. But where are you when the real discussion takes place about Aboriginal incarceration? A highest female population in the women's prison are Aboriginal women. The fact that our children are still dying in custody. The fact that we have an overrepresentation in the medical system, that we're not on par across many of the social factors that we get measured against. And so you got the good intent. But good intent will only get you to the front door. Open the goddamn door, for God's sakes, and walk through the threshold and be a little bit innovative in your thinking. Be bold. Be bold in your partnerships in the Indigenous community. Don't just stick to your swim lane, because if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. And I'm picking up on a point that Thierra raised, and I actually wrote this down in my notes. Cast the net further afield. What I see on the horizon, which is incredibly frustrating, is you get the same old mob who get picked like they're the only Aboriginal people that exist on the planet. Put that to one side, for God's sakes. They're not the experts. Every Aboriginal person has a story to tell, and whatever their story is, choose that person if it resonates with the discussions that you're having. If it's somebody in business, go and speak to an Aboriginal business proprietor. Not the same one that you had last year, because you need to chop it up a bit. Because here's what happened. In the Aboriginal community, we're now being gate-kept by those individuals that always get the Guernsey to play. Meanwhile, those of us who are not necessarily pinning our hopes on an invitation to the table, we're quietly going about the business, but we're never going to be asked to sit at these tables. Why? Because we're too noisy and we ask too many difficult questions and we're too loud, so they'd rather have a quiet little Jackie sitting next to them. Not that I'm saying my brothers and sisters who are sitting in those spaces are Jackies, please don't get me wrong, but if we're hearing the same voice year in, year out, I'm sorry, but even I get a little bit tired. So chop it up a bit. Cast the field a little bit further. Think about it.
And I think that goes back to what I was saying around you need more representation, you need more youth, you need more diversity. You know, there's so many young professionals in this space that and I'm not even that old, that are in my age. I got told once, and my experience being on a board, I was quite young, and there was a lot of hesitation from community. Who's this young person? And what does she know? I was like, hello, I've got a piece of paper, I've got a degree, what more do you want from me? And I think we need to allow these spaces where we're opening up these channels for our young leaders to step in, and we need to support them in that space, because there's still a little bit of hesitation. And another thing in community that pushes back around consultation and engagement is lateral violence. The lateral violence in our community is killing us, and you don't realise it until you're in these spaces and you're like, well, I learnt about it, but now I'm in the firing line and this is raw. We need to really support our younger generation around how do we navigate this, because I think we can break the cycle, we can, but how do we achieve it?
And picking up from that point, one thing that some people forget is that those young people that are being asked to take the platform, they've got an army standing behind them. They've got, like my daughter's got me, my gorgeous old auntie, my sister, lots of other people who are well equipped in feeding the information to them so that they can navigate spaces effortlessly. And then when there is a requirement to come back to the home base and decipher what was said and done, they have sounding boards. They've got a whole village behind them. And we seem to forget that.
Yeah, we do. So I've worked in 30 odd years in health, and when you work in an industry that long, you see things getting recycled.
Oh,
like
yes.
we've tried that and we're doing it again. And it's stale water.
Yes.
It's like they're bringing out a glass of stale water.
And now it's starting to stink.
Yeah.
Take your stink ass self over there.
So you mentioned it about you control it. You mentioned about let's be innovative, let's be bold. Is that what's going to take to shift the dial? Or if not, what is going to take to shift that dial?
The first thing that needs to shift is that non-Indigenous folks need to understand that in the Indigenous domain, even though they might know one Aboriginal person, they are not the experts. So step aside, honey. And we need to be very clear as Indigenous peoples who've got because there was a time in my growing up, if you don't have a piece of paper, you're not educated, you don't get to sit in these tables. Well, I'm about to acquire a 4th degree, so I don't know how many more pieces of paper you grab little folks want me to have. But I think I'm more than equipped to be able to lend voice to the conversation. So the first thing that needs to happen is that Aboriginal, non-Indigenous Australians need to understand that all things Aboriginal, for the most part, should sit within the Aboriginal domain. We've got more than enough qualified technical experts to be able to help navigate the conversations. And the second thing that needs to happen is that pathways need to be created. I know that we've got pathways into education to encourage kids to come out of high school into either a TAFE zone and then onto higher education. We need to think about the same generation of pathways within the industries that we work in. These corporations, these entities exist on creating a succession plan for young people coming through, but they're all from the dominant discourse. We need to be understanding that if we want succession planning in our own communities, we either need to bang on the door and step our foot through the threshold in a very strong, meaningful way and be unapologetic in when we occupy those spaces. That might shift the dial. But more than that, we as a community need to make an investment in our own lot. Yes, we can have scholarships. Yes, the mining companies dish out scholarships left, right and centre. But if it's not happening in the home, I can tell you that I wouldn't have 5 highly educated black women sitting beside me if I didn't do my homework and push the narrative around how important education is. My mother always said to me, education is the key the golden key that unlocks many doors. And she was absolutely right. So as a community, we need to take up the challenge, not to rely on scholarships from the mining companies. Yes, they work. And I appreciate the generosity. When you think about it, it's not a lot of money. That's how much they spend on friggin' bickies for their morning tea. But it is an offering. It is something that we should be accepting. But it starts in the home. We need to be taking up the challenge as our own selves, our own community, and take agency in this space.
I think just going off what Mum said, I think we also need to realise there's strength in numbers as well. And we need to remember that we, as 100% in the spaces of, that's the biggest frustration when you're working in this space is when there's non-Indigenous experts telling you how you should be working with blackfellas. And you're like, well, what more do you want me to do? Aren't I living and breathing this experience? But that's okay, we'll take that off the agenda. But when we're talking about pathways as well, I think we need to really hone in on that and just talk about the development pathways around not just putting someone in a position, but how can we support them and continue their growth and their development in this pathway, because that gets happened so many times where our mob are out in this workforce where they get plonked in a position and it's like, well, where's their career growth? Where's their trajectory? Because if you're just leaving them in a position to be stale and be the token Indigenous representative, you're not doing them justice. You're not doing that community justice. You should see more Indigenous vice-chancellors and chancellors in the education space, and even in the mining sector. You need more Indigenous people in the executive, in the chairs, general managers and CEOs. That's what you should be targeting for.
Just a quick Dan disclaimer, not all non-Aboriginal people are grubby.
Yeah. As Dr. Cornell West called them, we went to a conference and he goes, they're vanilla slices because, and it's such a brilliant analogy because, you know, when you're talking proclamation and you're talking about self-determination, we've never done it alone. There's been non-Indigenous allies alongside us in this space, and I think we need to continue to encourage that, because half the time if we're standing alone as, you know, as an Indigenous community, sometimes we get the tokenistic of, especially as an Indigenous woman, you're the angry black woman.
Oh,
but
God.
if I have the alliance of non-Indigenous people that are supporting me in this space, oh wait, there's strength in numbers. There's other people that are aligned with the messaging that's being created today.
And that's a very, very valid point. Allyship is so critical for our survival as a whole species of humans. If we're not leaning into each other and supporting each other in meaningful ways, and I do like, what was his name?
Dr. Cornell West.
Dr. Cornell West, he used the phrase, for those who are not part of the black struggle, we need our good vanilla slices. I love that. My sister girl over here reckon, how can I be a good vanilla slice? And I reckon, yeah! But it is so critical. We are small in numbers. We only represent 2.3% of the state population, 3 something or rather percent on a national basis. That's a very minuscule amount. Although, on the last census, we went from 500,000 or 600,000 to nearly 1 million. I wonder where all those black folks sprung from.
Mushrooms.
Mushroom blacks. My mum called them mushroom blacks. But anyway, I'm distracted. Allyship is so important for those people sitting in the audience who have a genuine intent to do something positive. The best I can suggest is get to know us. I remember sitting in a reconciliation yarning circle. Oh God, don't you love them? And I asked the question of the listening audience, I said, so aside from the Indigenous people sitting around in this yarning circle, is there one non-Indigenous person that can tell me that they've had an Aboriginal person at their dinner table? Crickets again. Absolute silence. Static energy came out of their persona. And I'm like, well, that might be a starting point, but I did warn them. I don't suggest you run out and hug the first black fella that you see on the street. You might get a punch in the freaking nose, but never mind. The point is, it's about how are you ever going to understand us as a people if we're not part of your network of either friends or colleagues or associates? I'm not asking to come to your breakfast table every morning, but just once. But we might, I mean, my sister girl over here, the great Vanilla Slice, I don't know how many times we've sat at her dinner table talking about how things can be improved with both of our energies and the community that we bring along in the journey to be able to cement a pathway forward.
Perfect. You mentioned that people need to stick to their swim lane.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm not sure.
So, oh gosh, I've got to watch my P's and Q's. And I'll talk about heritage as an example because I'm no longer in that space, so I can talk very freely. The amount of times when I would meet with people and talk about heritage and First Nations voices, and then I'll just, you know, people with backgrounds that aren't even relatable to heritage or science, and I'm like, why are you even here? And it just frustrates me because I'd see it time and time again, especially in the mining sector, when I joined one company, and I won't name the names, and I was a fly in a bowl of milk. And I said, you're telling me you can't get Indigenous leaders that work in heritage, that I've come from an all-Indigenous space where we've got the skill sets, and you're telling me you can't hire more than one Indigenous person in heritage? And they looked at me, and my manager goes, he was French, and he goes, yes, T, I understand, advocate. And I said, right, you're my vanilla slice, how do we get more black fellas in this space? And we made it happen. But I think the frustrating part is if you're in a space such as heritage or First Nations and you have more non-Indigenous people working there, well, we have a problem. because if you are the voice or you are representing them in that space, you don't understand the relatability, you don't understand the concerns from the First Nations, you're not able to be relatable, and how can you build that relationship and rapport when you've got no first-handed experiences? And unfortunately, we're seeing it time and time again where you'd have a token person in there and they'll be like, okay, that person can work with then a person coming over First Nations from another company. It's like, okay, so you're adding also cultural loading on top of the work that we're already doing in our space. How is that even fair? So I might get you to continue.
So when I say stick to your swim lane, I'm not saying that you can't expand your borders when you're talking about lived experience, technological advancements or innovation into whatever domain that you're operating in. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, however, is that, like, I used to be a lawyer back in the day. There is no way in hell, they're going to have a daycare worker making representations to the bench about critical criminal law matters. So if you are not the person with the either lived experience or technical competencies or any of those criteria that might lend itself to you perhaps knowing something about that subject matter, please leave it to the experts. Now, I'm not a heritage person, I'm not an environmental scientist. I will always defer to my daughter who actually is. So, and she will often say to me, well, you're the lawyer, Mum, why don't you tell me? And so it's about complementary technical competency, skills, lived experience that we can all use to help create spaces that are safe for all of us.
But if you have an Indigenous focused role or First Nations voices, please do not recruit non-Indigenous people as a majority in that space, because you're doing a disservice to your organisation that you're working for. And unfortunately, when you see that, you're going in constant cycles around, well, how can we work? And when you have the majority of non-Indigenous people in the space, you constantly hear the term help. And you're like, oh, we're helping the black fellas, or we're helping them do this, or how can we help them achieve this? And it's like, well, we're already thriving as First Nations people across. We're already thriving, we're already successful, but it's about how do we navigate the networks and the channels that we can to support and elevate people in this space. So I think we need to also change the mindset and the narrative from helping people to working alongside people or empowering people. Yeah.
So just quickly on that swim lane, fresh or salt water?
Look, I love fresh water, because wherever you go, the channels underneath the waterways and the aquifers, there's such a beauty and uniqueness to them that, and I think that goes back to us as old First Nations people, that you can have salt water wherever you go, but it's the power of the fresh water where you find the fresh water sources and the uniqueness of these underwater ways and connection to community and country that even scientists can't explain, how aquifers regenerate themselves and rejuvenate themselves. So we need to be mindful, and it goes back to us as First Nations people. We know all these stories, we know all these connections, and the power of us as First Nations people is the stories and the connections that we have to country. So that's my answer.
Spoken like a true environmental scientist.
Yes.
For me, because I was a desert woman and we grew up on a reserve in Mount Magnet, which is nothing but a dust bowl, salt water was always the attraction. Why? Because we didn't see it often. And so that is my healing space. That is my go-to place. If my kids are concerned that I've gone missing for far too long and they're wondering where I am, they'll go to the beach and they'll find me there.
It's true.
So where's Mum? Go to the beach and you'll find her there. So salt water has always been therapeutic for me because of being a desert-dwelling blackfella growing up on a reserve where you didn't see too many bodies of water, even though we knew where they were. But the salt water always had this therapeutic effect on my soul.
Perfect. And I'm going to open it to the floor for questions because, as you can tell, we can talk underwater. So, have we got a question from the... Oh, we've got one question down there. And then we're going to ask people online if they've got questions too. Oh.
Sorry.
Thanks, Brother Dan, for talking about not all white fellas are grubby little fellas. There's some really, really good allies that we've come across that really want to help. But I have a question because I talked with one of the lecturers here as I was on my way about black cladding. It's been a tough gig being an Aboriginal business owner. What's even made tougher is, this question is directed towards Gningala. The Aboriginal Business Directory and most of the Aboriginal business and economic units in government right now with JETSI and others, and I wanted to name them up, do not have Aboriginal people in those roles and in those spaces. Sadly, I have to say and point out that the Noongar Chamber of Commerce and Industry does not have an Aboriginal person at the helm as well. So these have become problematic for us in the workspace, especially in being able to navigate the procurement process. So that's my first question. It does make you frustrated and sometimes angry.
Yeah.
But I have a pretty good navigator of that space sitting beside me that's worked out a way around it. What are some of your suggestions? Can you suggest what we as Aboriginal business people can do, because we are seriously, as 100% Aboriginal business owner, we are actually outnumbered by the ones who are the 51%ers. That's become really problematic for us. So I wanted Gningala to answer that.
So, in a nutshell, I go back to the allyship argument, and that is find your tribe. You have been very fortunate, you and your husband, in your business undertakings, of having exceptional allyship who actually promote your business and centre you in all things creative and artistic. And the performances and the shows that I've attended and seen the works of little Mr. Farmer over there, who is an absolute genius, you've done well in sourcing and moving with your own tribe. The problem with, the policy is fundamentally flawed because we were not engaged in the negotiations in terms of how to draft. It is unenforceable, so therefore there is no legal comeback for any of this. But the landscape is shifting, and here's what's really exciting. The Australian Securities and Investment Commission have just now taken to court an Aboriginal business that was selling life insurance or funeral plans to blackfellas, robbing them blind and causing huge distress. Just now got found out for misleading and deceptive conduct. They were lying through their teeth and got fined $3.5 million. So if that's not a start to say, on the landscape, you grubby little operators who think you're going to get away with it because you went to bed on Monday as a white person, on Wednesday you woke up as a black fella, your time is running out. I would also suggest that, given that you have used the approach where you will go into uncharted territories where not every black fella is flocking to, that's been the fundamental linchpin in your thriving success. You are known in spaces that I have not seen Indigenous business proprietors operating in. Why? Because you're prepared to be bold and innovative and creative, and you seek out your tribe, and those people take very, very good care of you. So I think you've already got the answers. You don't need to be even, and this sounds somewhat contradictory, whilst we do have the Aboriginal chambers, they do serve a purpose, and now they've got a peak body that I think will net some positive results. You do still have the issue of the big self-appointed birdiers who want to run the show. Birdiers is a Noongar word for big shot, or, person in charge, the boss. They still insist on them being the only people on this platform, and that's actually I find it irritating. Why? Because people don't understand that we're all in the same leaky boat. And rather than putting a plug in the bloody leak inside the boat and all of us rowing together so that we can get something out of whatever the crumbs are that's left on the table from whatever is left over, we're not going to get there. But in response to your question, lateral violence is always going to be an issue. And I asked my auntie a long time ago when she was still alive, and I said, well, why do we do this to each other, auntie? Because she was my stepmother, actually. And she said, you know what, think about it like this. When you've got an oppressive force coming down on you as an oppressed peoples, there's nowhere else to go for that energy to come out except sideways. And who are the people standing on your side? Your brothers and sisters and your family and your community. So that, to me, was a great depiction of how it works, but it comes from scarcity. And I'm often reminded of a descriptor I often use, and that is crabs in a bucket. Have you ever seen crabs in a bucket? They rip the eyeballs out and the arms off and the feelers off, and just to try and climb to the top to get out of the goddamn bucket. And unfortunately, because of the scarcity, because of the oppression, because of the oppressive constructs that we have to operate within, unfortunately, there are a lot of our communities that feel that way, and they will rip your bloody eyes out just to get one step ahead of you. Does that answer your question?
Full of analogies, Mum.
Do we have a question online? Okay, anyone? Oh, that one was first. That one, sorry. And then, yeah, and then that one.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful explanation. We had a privilege a couple of years ago to sit at the Work Cafe and talk about partnerships. We actually, as an organisation, partner with Indigenous corporations and Aboriginal corporations to enhance pathways and create the power future generations of students that come through. And that's part of my role at ECU is to partner with organisations to do the scholarships. And we've done it well to an extent. But it's that, what you just said, that the natural side that really impacts students. And I want to know, from your perspective, what can we do when we talk to our corporate partners to help create pathways for education? How can you do this, encourage more students to embrace education? What can we do better?
I think the starting proposition must be that not every blackfellow wants to go to university. I mean, there are electricians in the oil and gas space who make more money than I ever made in the bloody corporate space. Yeah. And so therein lies this dichotomy where fundamental to income generation are highly skilled practitioners, but not necessarily with a university degree. So that's one starting proposition we must think about. The other starting proposition is there's too many entities that I've seen that go to the same old place, like the likes of the friggin' Clontarfs of the world. Please don't get me started on them. $54 million, and who do they have at the table? They certainly don't have too many blackfellas employed. They've got crotchety old non-Indigenous men who couldn't find a job even if they had glasses on.
Or ex-footballers.
Or ex-footballers, because they've got nowhere else to go. So that's their graveyard. Go to Clontarf, they'll give you a job. But at the expense of those young black boys who are thinking about what's the next step for me. And unfortunately, I will use this word and I will use it very, very strongly. It is the commodification of the black body that's creating the problem in the first place. They're commodifying black young men coming out of school. They get the $50 million from feds and states. And where does it leave the young black kids who think, because not everyone's going to have a history or a staying power in an AFL. Not everyone's a footballer. What about those that are musicians or environmental scientists or artists? Or all of those. We seem to forget that, as I said earlier, we must cast the net as farther afield as possible and not seek to rely on one particular agency or organisation that's going to be a fit for purpose. Try them all out. Give them all a go.
I think adding on to that, what's missing and what I've seen missing in the university space is there's not a strong momentum around mentorship. It's a big gap. And we're seeing a lot of these young people starting their journey in university, but where's the transition and the support for them when they do start their journey at university around what does the perspectives look like beyond that? And I think we need to really harness that around if we've got a young individual coming in that wants to be a teacher, well, why are we not teeing them up with a previous teacher graduate at ECU? Why are we not doing the fundamental basis? So if we have a really strong mentorship and engagement with them, then you're creating pathways and opportunities, and you can talk about what's beyond university. And if you have someone that's relatable, they can talk about the challenges that they're dealing with at university as well. So you need that relatability, and sometimes that's missing.
Perfect, thank you. Last question with short answers.
Kaya, Jesse Gidget Lovett here, proud Wajak and Gunjamara man. Firstly, thank you for the deadly yarns about fluidity, water. Water is very important. I want to offer a little yarn of my own and a question to both Gningala and Thierra. In workplaces, I've seen cultural safety, celebrated through these so-called surveys, which really annoy the hell out of me, especially when awards and reports come out of them, but predominantly they're made up of more so non-Indigenous people who were on those surveys. All right. So yeah, when I look around, Aboriginal staff are often less than 3% of the workforce. Too often the idea of cultural safety is being defined and declared by non-Indigenous leaders rather than being lived and felt by mobs ourselves. From my experience, cultural safety isn't something you can self-declare, especially if you're not Indigenous, especially when there is a RAP involved in that process. It has to be experienced by Aboriginal people for it to be real. So my question is, before you jump in there,
I'm bursting at the seams here.
In systems where Aboriginal staff make up less than 3% of the workforce, what needs to happen so cultural safety is not being self-declared by non-Indigenous leaders and staff?
Well, I sat in a forum here at ECU in Building 10 and they were talking about cultural safety and it bothered me, and I'll tell you why. I have my own cultural safety. I grew up in a semi-traditional household where multilingual grandfather who was a senior lawman, so I know about culture. We were imparted with all that worldly wisdom from our parents, our grandparents, and the extended family who are all multilingual, all knew about culture and cultural protocols. So I have a problem with the phraseology around cultural safety. I feel safe in my own culture. I don't need a non-Indigenous person to tell me what cultural safety looks like. Yeah. So that's one thing. It may actually have an appeal, though, for those that are perhaps seeking to define their indigeneity or their identity or on a journey to discover what that connection looks like. And for those people, I have huge empathy. But then if you are touted as the Aboriginal expert and you've never lived the life, please don't promote yourself as the cultural guru. Go and find yourself first. Do that as a starting proposition. And then you might be able to talk about what cultural safety really looks like from an Indigenous perspective.
And I think the frustration with those cultural safety surveys, because I get surveyed out at my place of work all the time.
Truly.
So I just rip myself and they just hear me tear and that's it. So do you want the real yarn? And I'll tell the GM directly. I think it's also really frustrating around, well, what's happening after these surveys? Yeah. Are you actually implementing any change? Because if you're doing a cultural so-called safety survey for the sake of it, to be a part of your KPI and your strategy, well, we don't want a bar of it. And unless we're actually going to implement progressive change and what we can really improve the workforce, and I think those surveys can be good for people that might not vocalise it, but we need to allow a space of, well, if there is cultural safety and concerns, well, why are we not going beyond a survey?
Yep.
What can we implement here in our place of work? And what stages and steps can we place to improve the cultural safety of not just the staff, but the students as well? How do we create a better space?
Thank you, Gningala.
Sorry, time. we can finish this at
Just
14.
a problem with the cultural safety phraseology is that there is the expectation that it only relates to one culture, Indigenous culture. What it doesn't do is allow for the cultural nuances of other cultural peoples who've come to our shores, who have a different cultural identity and makeup, and what about their cultural safety? So it shouldn't just be pivoting around the little Indigenous space, because cultural safety is important for everyone, particularly if you come from a non-English speaking background. That is important too.
Can I...
Thank you.
That's great. That is a good question and a really important... We could have another whole session on that. Can I close the discussion and thank NaNroma for opening the event? I want to thank the events team who've helped setting these up. You've done an amazing job. I want to thank your amazing facilitator, me. No. But I really want to thank Gningala and Thierra for your contributions. Your insights have been greatly valued and appreciated. And I think you both are good examples, and NaNroma, of course, of the NAIDOC theme this year, which is strength, vision and legacy. So please thank our guests. And I want to thank the people in the room, and I want to thank people online. And just to remind you that this is the beginning of these conversations. This is the second of a series of 5. The next one is going to be exciting. That's going to be down at Bunbury. That's the 25th of September. And at that event, we'll explore the life layer of Carter, the hills. And at that event, we'll have speakers Renee Isaac Guthridge and Joanne Hill. So please look out for the details, register for that. That'll be online as well, and face-to-face. So thank you. I have little gifts for Gningala and Thierra, so thank you. And we're done, 2 minutes over. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, good. Busy like
Yeah.